So OpenAI just bought Astral, which is a startup behind some tools like UV, Ruff, and TY that you might have used. I certainly have used them before. These are tools that millions of Python developers use basically every single day. The Astral team is now folding directly into Codex, which OpenAI says now has over 2 million weekly active users. Can you believe that?
A lot of people.
That's a lot of
It's a
people.
lot of developers. Developers.
Exactly. But there's real nervousness here in the developer community about a company worth 300 billion now sitting basically owning, right, this part of the package management process.
Yeah.
Because for the longest time, they've been this independent player, right, where they've owned this really critical part of the development process, which is package management. And now all of a sudden that's falling under the remit of OpenAI. So people are nervous. And this just seems kind of like part of a broader pattern of OpenAI trying to own basically the entire developer AI workflow.
I heard this described as Hacker News's least favorite company acquiring Hacker News's favorite company.
Yeah,
that was pretty apropos.
I think that's super apropos, right? Because I think these open source companies feel very like Robin Hood-esque, kind of like for the masses, very
100%.
rogue. And OpenAI is basically epitomizes like the opposite of that, whatever the opposite of like a Robin
Open
Hood
name
is.
only.
Yeah, exactly. Like a King Richard kind of vibe, you know what I mean? So my question to you, Pierce, is what does Astral actually give them that they couldn't just build themselves? First of all, and then I guess following up to that, should developers be worried?
Yeah, I think this acquisition is actually really interesting because it also follows in the footsteps of what Anthropic did a few months ago, where they bought Bun. So Bun was this upstart that was trying to do an open source JavaScript interpreter that was faster than what you would be able to get with running Node. And Anthropic picked that up, maybe to own the package ecosystem, but I think also just because Bun was building a team that was so good at doing low-level JavaScript optimization, and Claude Code is written in JavaScript. So there's definitely something here that Astral, they're known for building this Python tooling, but they're also known for building Python tooling that's really fast and efficient in Rust.
So the people are just cracked who are working at these companies.
The people are unreal at these like low-level like systems language designy things. And I think that there was part of this probably that was trying to pick up a very talented team that can operate in the language that these internal teams operate in to build these CLI tools. So I think that's component number one, is like a proper acqui-hire of some really good people.
And, what were they acquired for? Like 700 million or something like that?
Right? I think it's undisclosed, but that's like what the rumor mill is
sure.
Up. Yeah.
Which is relatively cheap, right? For OpenAI acquiring a company.
Especially if it's combo of cash and stock. Yeah.
100%. And you get what, like 20, 30 people maybe, like cracked engineers who get to join your team.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably worth it for OpenAI.
Totally. Yeah. Like when you're offering signing bonuses of some senior research and engineering talent, hundreds of millions of dollars to join these companies. Yeah, that actually does look kind of cheap.
It's kind of a good deal for them, ironically.
Yeah, it sounds crazy to say. But so I think that's a part of it. It's like a talent play. But also OpenAI can attract world-class talent on their own. So I don't think that was the full picture. I think on Hacker News and on Twitter, everyone was talking about how this is OpenAI acquiring UV, because UV is far and away their best known utility that Astral shipped. But I actually think what's missing in that story is they also were acquiring TY and ruff. So ruff was a linter. So it helps to make your Python code look the same. It replaces old solutions like Black or FLAC 8. And TY was useful as a language server, but behind the scenes, what it's doing is it's analyzing the Python code that you've written and it's telling you the bugs that you've made along the way. It's doing this via static analysis of your code. So basically looking at, this variable is defined here and it's linked down here and you're accessing some property on it, but that property doesn't actually exist. It's a very hard challenge in these languages that are dynamic like Python and JavaScript and not properly compiled. Because if you wrote most code in, Rust or C++, the act of compiling gives you some guarantees around the validity of code that you've written, right? It's not going to let you compile code where you're trying to access something that's wrong. Python will, which lets you introduce bugs that you didn't really expect at runtime. I use this every day. I think the cool thing about TY is that it will give you a heads up on a lot of those issues before you actually run the Python code, which is really useful, not just for people, but for agents.
Right. And so this is the linting stage, right? This is what we call a linter. So it runs before the code runs.
Exactly.
It just runs in your IDE effectively.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the vision here, if I'm Sam Altman, I'm thinking through, why does this acquisition make sense? I'm thinking through because this team is able to build these linting tools that execute faster than anyone else, which is really hard to do. For a while, Microsoft has been the main steward of Pyrite, which is this alternative Python linter. It's super slow, especially for big projects. It can take like multiple minutes to run, which is okay if you're a human, really bad if you're an agent that's trying to run this stuff really quickly in a loop, right? So I think the vision here, since OpenAI writes a lot of Python code internally, and I also think that's kind of the default language that they use in the cloud when they want to write some sandbox script. Usually it's going to generate you the graph or plot that you want in Python as a first-class language. I think the vision here really is for their own internal agent loops to be able to say, a user wants something, I'm going to quickly write a script, validate that with ruff and ty.
But why couldn't they do that already now? Like, why do they have to spend $700 million to acquire these tools?
Well, I suppose they don't. They could have used the open source version, but I feel like this lets them guide the development of that a little bit more clearly.
Makes
and that's
sense.
probably something that they just want to own as part of this end-to-end stack to write better code. The goal here, I think, is for agents to learn how to write better code in their RL environments, and then also for agents to be able to quickly get feedback in practice before they give you the code as output.
Makes sense. And so your theory is that they're going to have a closed source version of this developer tool so that their agents are going to have access to the best ruff linter and maybe not make it open source.
I think there's a good chance that happens. Or they'll open source it, but again, it furthers their own objectives.
And they want to be able to steer the process, basically,
That's
of
right.
building these open source tools.
They want the team. They want the best in class solution.
And if it gets really good, maybe not make it open source.
Maybe.
Interesting. Well, I have a theory, Pierce, because I think that this announcement also coincides with the drop of GPT 5.4 Mini and Nano. This was released on March 17th. Did you hear about these tiny models?
Vaguely.
The idea here is basically that, they're releasing these super, super small models, smaller than any models they've released to date. And these are going to be the most cost-effective and most efficient models that they have.
So 5.4 Mini averages 180 tokens per second on their API, and Nano is about 200 tokens per second. So you can probably do the math extrapolating, given their inference architecture, of they're hosting these on the same GPUs. You can roughly do the multiplier. I think it's like roughly 30 tokens a second on the Frontier 5.2 or 5.4. So, this is probably like a 5 times smaller model, give or take.
I think what's interesting here is that we're seeing now the release of models that are under 1 billion parameters. For instance, the Qwen 4.8 billion parameter model that dropped earlier this year. And it feels like the frontier of what a small model is now getting pushed past, or better said, below the 1 billion mark, which is cool because once you get past the 1 billion mark, these models are running blazingly fast. And my theory is that these models are probably getting close to that rough order of magnitude.
My money's on these still being bigger.
I agree, but I think like they're approaching that small lower bound. At the same time, GPT also released this challenge. Have you heard of this? The parameter golf challenge?
You're really excited about this.
Dude, I am stoked to the limit about this challenge, right? So what this challenge...
The limit does not exist.
The limit does not exist. So I'm stoked to the limit of non-existence. The challenge is basically this. It's super simple, right? So the FineWeb data set. This is the like basically a standard data set on Hugging Face. So they have a little held out data set of this data, right? And the challenge to you is train a model that is at most 16 megabytes in artifact. So that is both the weights and the training code bundled together. Train that for 10 minutes and try to get the lowest possible loss on this held out FineWeb data set. That's it. Super easy, right? And people have been really stoked about this because the idea is that, now rather than training the biggest, best performant model, the challenge here that they're releasing to the community is train the smallest, tiniest, teensiest model that you possibly can on the teensiest bit of compute. And we want to see if you can come up with some really cool research ideas that allow these models to do, obviously not as well as their big models, but maybe like roughly in a ballpark of something that is somewhat interesting in terms of performance, right? So what does this mean? I think OpenAI is getting into the game of smaller models, is getting into the game of more open source, community-based style development toolkits, and combine that with this Astral stuff, with the UV thing we've been talking about. I kind of feel like OpenAI is becoming an AI developer company fundamentally. The release of these models in conjunction with like the acquisition of this company, I think there's a play right now in OpenAI becoming the de facto AI developer tooling company in addition to one of the preeminent frontier model providers. I think we should see this basically in conjunction as a whole, right? I think this is like a broader narrative here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I feel like we've talked a lot off mic and some on mic about shifting the burden of inference to edge compute, which makes a lot of sense because, especially if you have a very small model, you can get even faster performance than you might be able to get in the cloud because you don't have any network latency, right? You're literally just running everything on chip wherever you are at all times. And like networks fast enough, maybe that doesn't really matter. But at the limit, especially in other countries, maybe the 5G bandwidth is not quite built out, that does start to matter. And I think also there's an element too where people just want the privacy of these things. Like models that you can run locally mean models that are inherently private. It doesn't have to leave your silo. That's very useful for enterprise purposes and whatnot. So the more that you can really push models to perform well when they're smaller, those research advancements probably scale up as well to the bigger models. So it's kind of like what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You're probably not going to have the most frontier architectures locally.
And you can do more fun experimentation with these small models too.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you have a little lab where you can tinker and play around with stuff very quickly, as opposed to when you're working with a big model, it's like working with this, massive machine that it's hard to even figure out where to begin if you want to edit something in the process. With a small model, it's like you're playing with like a little thing of Play-Doh. Like you can just kind of shape it and squeeze it and stretch it in any way that you want. And a big model is almost like you're working on, building a house. It's like, how do I even begin to change anything here? This thing is so big and already set in stone. I don't really know how to even make any edits, right?
Here's the thing, Rich. Right now, models are not yet a primitive. I feel like they're close to it because API billing costs are so cheap. But at the end of the day, if you're writing a web app, you can't say, here's the function call that I'm going to make to the browser and get some output from an LLM, right? For almost everything else we build on the web, you could pretty much just do that. And it runs on your architecture or it runs on the client side. And I think the second that we get to the world in which the architecture itself can just be bundled on device, that opens up a ton of opportunities, not to deploy AI as a first class feature, but to deploy AI at the margins that are just useful for people. Like you can classify different things in a list into these different criterion, or you can create an image dynamically to spice up some web page landing. Like there's just so much you can do.
Yeah, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, when you're not really worried about having to deal with all of these intricacies of these APIs and these callouts, like you can just all do it with one single call. I think that's where we're headed.
I think so too. And you could imagine then, in the world of things, you can have everything have some on-device LLM built into it. Like imagine that, the traffic lights have a little locally running LLM.
I don't know if we want that.
Yeah, but then you have a little camera, right? And on device, it can be doing some sort of dynamic prediction of when it should turn green, when it should turn red, when yellow, right? The sky's the limit, right? You could even have an LLM running in your trash can, right? So far, we haven't done that because the idea of putting compute into these things just feels so impossible and so silly because there's nothing interesting you can do with such low compute. But if you could scale down the ability of LLMs to be performant, even at a really tiny scale, then you can start putting them into all these different things. And then we're really dealing in an evergreen environment where the ability of AI to permeate our like society and our environment is almost limitless.
So do you think, just to play devil's advocate for a second, do you think this is a good faith attempt for OpenAI to help provide a little bit of compute to people to try to outsource these ideas and crowdsource good solutions? Or do you think this is basically a recruitment drive for them to find really promising researchers that are in other countries or universities in the US to say, here's a little bit of compute, show us what you got?
It's a recruitment drive, man. And like, I'm not even saying this from a place of, I mistrust them. They literally say that on the website. They say, hey, reach out
you
to
do
us.
The best here, you'll get a job interview. Basically.
They literally say that. And they say, hey, by the way, in June, we're trying to hire a cohort of about 1,000 or so engineers. And we will be looking at these submissions. So if you feel like your resume is maybe a little bit, not quite what we would usually be looking for, but you still want to maybe work here, give us your best shot. And, that could be another path for you to get an interview at this company.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that they're open about this. They're not trying to be, ironically, they're not trying to be like Alibaba with the release of Qwen here, where Qwen is truly a beautiful open source model that everyone uses and enjoys using. They're just saying, hey, we're trying to hire more people. We're maybe trying to become a little bit more open source in the sense of us developing more frameworks for AI practitioners. but we're not trying to release, a state of the art small language model here. This is recruiting.
This is recruiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair and simple. The last thing that I'll flag on this before we move on is I also think 10 minutes on 8 H100s is a pretty interesting time boundary to draw this. They're partnering with RunPod on this. I know you love. Where, to a big model, even a non-frontier model, you're going to be spending days on an array of 8 H100s. Like, that's actually not that much compute for frontier models. It's interesting though, because it correlates to 1 to 4 days when running training on a local M5 machine. So like just a local, top tier MacBook will basically be able to train that same model over the course of days. And I think that there's something interesting about drawing a small model line in the sand at exactly that amount of petaflops, which is how we quantify these models. Because that kind of means that if someone's able to crack the code on doing training efficiently within this regime, that also means that it unlocks local fine tuning or even local training of a full end-to-end model on your data set. You totally own the weights to it. And the research directions for a model of that size are pretty interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And the last thing I'll say to the last thing you said is that GPT-2, you can reproduce those results on roughly 10 minutes of 8 H100s. And so there's a whole ecosystem of folks that are trying to do these so-called speedruns. And so when OpenAI gives us this number, it is basically tapping into that community and saying, hey, we want to be part of this community of folks that are trying to train these models really quickly. And so the 10 minutes number isn't just being pulled out of thin air. There is a whole, it's coming from that basically.
Makes sense.